this video, we'll look at solving polynomial equations by factoring. So in the class that I'm teaching, in a previous lesson, or series of lessons, we learned how to solve quadratic equations using some different methods, in particular using square roots or the quadratic formula. But there's actually an easier way that only works some of the time, called factoring. And so at this point in our series of videos, if we are on 10.4, we have not yet learned how to factor. That's what's coming up next. So our problems are going to already be set up the way we want them to be set up. So they're going to look something like this, where we've got multiple parentheses. And then what we're being asked to do is to solve this and figure out what x has to equal. So at this point, we have multiplied before. So we could multiply this out and see that it is a quadratic equation. It actually ends up being x squared minus 2x minus 15. And what we would know at this point is how to solve that with the quadratic formula. But that's more work than we actually need to do, because if I am capable of splitting it into these two parentheses, or since they already gave it to me, then if I have these two parentheses, then we can use what is called the zero product property. This property says that if I multiply two things together, a and b, and say that they equal 0, one of the two has to be 0. So in other words, in order for this statement to equal 0, either x plus 5 needs to equal 0, or x minus 3 needs to equal 0. And so that's a really simple set of equations to solve, because the thing that makes x plus 5 equal 0 here would be a negative 5, which you can get either by thinking about it or by subtracting the 5 over. Here we would add 3 to both sides and get that x equals 3. So just like whenever we solve quadratic equations other ways, we get two answers. In this way, most of the time we will get two answers as well. So that's what we're going to do in this video. There's going to be a couple of ways they try to trip us up, but overall it's the same idea. So for instance, on this example, it says n plus 3 times n minus 2 equals 0. So n has to equal what I get whenever I try to make n plus 3 equal 0. So what plus 3 gives me 0, which is negative 3. And then the same thing for n minus 2 equals 0. What minus 2 equals 0, which is positive 2. In this case, we aren't given two parentheses, we're given one. And so hopefully we all can come to the conclusion that that our answer is y equals 2. That has to do with the fact that saying y minus 2 squared is the same as saying y minus 2 times y minus 2. And then maybe it's easier to see that that squared is not actually going to change what our answer is, because here I'm getting 2 minus 2 and again 2 minus 2, and so our answer is just 2. That squared doesn't really matter, because if we wanted to, we could actually square root both sides of this equation, and that would get rid of the squared, and it would also still leave us with 0 on the right, because the square root of 0 is 0. And so then we would know that we could go ahead and say, oh, y equals 2 is our answer. No. The way they're going to try to trick you on this, or trip you up, or one of the ways, is by making it more complicated. Like, there's a good chance that off the top of your head you don't know what number to put for n to make this statement equal 0. And so what we need to do is resort to our old school ways of solving equations. If 4n minus 5 needs to equal 0, then I can write this down as an equation, and I can add 5 and then divide by 4, and I end up with a fraction, and your teacher most likely wants you to leave that as 5/4 and not change it to a decimal, and most teachers, if not all, don't even want you to change that to a mixed number. You don't have to at this point in your math career. The same thing is going to happen on the second parentheses. We're going to add the 3, and then we're going to divide by 2. And our second answer is 3/2. So we still got two answers because we had two different parentheses. And you may be able to notice now a connection between, how could you have gotten 5/4 and 3/2 without having to write down all the work. Maybe you need another example. I have one here that will help us. This example is a more complicated example. So we don't just have two parentheses, and we've also got this number in front here. Let's just save the number in front for later. We have a squared again, which the same thing is going to be true as before, that this square doesn't even really matter for our problem, that we just need to figure out what this is. The squared is going to give us that answer twice if we wrote it out twice. But here, the number that gives us, that makes x plus 5 equals 0 would be -5. Here, we might need to do some work to solve. We'd add 9. And then we would divide by 7. And so that means that x equals 9/7. And then, so we've got -5, 9/7. Here, 2x plus 1. That one might be easier to solve in your head. We want to subtract 1 and divide by 2 and get x equals -1/2. And so the question is, what do we do with this 2 in front? Well, if I say, what would make 2 equal 0, the answer to that is nothing will make 2 equal 0. So what actually happens is that 2 in front doesn't give us another answer. There's not a fourth answer to this equation. Sorry, that 2 does have to, that 2 does impact things, particularly when we're graphing. Or if we were to multiply this all out for some reason, the 2 would matter. But as far as us figuring out what x equals, the 2 actually doesn't make a difference. One way of looking at it is I could divide both sides by 2 and I'd still have 0 on the right side because 0 divided by 2 is 0. And so that 2 actually can go away and not matter at all. I think that's probably one of the weirdest parts of these types of problems, is that idea that you have to have a variable, like, to wrap your head around it first. You have to have a variable in order to get an answer. So just having a 2 on the outside doesn't make a difference. That's our video for 10.4, solving polynomial equations by factoring. Once you know how to factor, you would do the first step yourself to get the parentheses, and then this would be your last step to find your answers. If you like this video, please hit the thumbs up, and feel free to check out other videos. I've suggested one somewhere on the screen. If you want to know when I post new videos, hit the subscribe button. And you can also follow me on Twitter at KSteveMath. If you have a math question that I haven't answered, tweet me a picture and I'll try to answer it. Thanks for watching.